We're back. I'm very pleased to say, joined by Carolyn Glick, one of our country's, and for that matter, the free world's great authorities on what's happening in the Middle East at any given moment. She lives in Israel. She is now a citizen of Israel. She has served in its government under Benjamin Netanyahu. She is a columnist, an author of Shackled Warrior and the Israel Solution. She is a senior fellow of the Center for Security Policy and otherwise just a great friend and much valued colleague. Carolyn Glick, welcome back to Securing America. It's good to have you with us.
Great to be on the program, and I just want to plug my Carolyn Glick Middle East News Hour webcast and podcast that everybody should be tuning in every week as well.
They should indeed. Carolyn, I want us to start by talking to you about whether you believe that what the Biden administration has been doing with and to Israel, and I want to talk with you about all of that, but whether that may be contributing to a sense on the part of Palestinian jihadists that it's open season on Israel at the moment, and therefore we're seeing this perhaps beginnings of a new intifada against the Jewish state.
Yeah, I think that your question is spot on, Frank. Absolutely, because the Biden administration is pretty clear that it's realigning the United States away from Israel and away from its traditional Sunni Arab allies and towards Iran at their expense. And we're seeing this very clearly in the nuclear talks in Vienna, where the Biden administration is bowing down and kowtowing to the Ayatollahs at every turn. And there's absolutely no doubt that Biden's nuclear capitulation to Iran and to its terror proxies as well, the Houthis, the Hamas, Hezbollah, etc., is empowering all of the terrorist forces in the Middle East to act not only against Israel, but also we see with escalating terror attacks against Saudi Arabia and against the UAE and Iraq on the part of Iran and its terror proxies. Yes.
You've characterized this, I think, as a betrayal of Israel by the Biden administration. What is the wellspring of that? Is it just this fixation with Iran? Is it an enmity towards Israel as well? Is it sort of the upshot of more generally the desire to reverse everything that Donald Trump did? All of the above? What do you think's going on here?
Well, it is all of the above, and I think it has to be really clear to the American people that while there may be a struggle inside of the Democratic Party between more classical liberals and progressive Marxists, the progressives have it. They have complete control over the administration's Middle East policies, and all of the senior personnel that's involved, whether it's Hadi Amar at the State Department or Mahir Bitar in the National Security Council, or Rob Malley, who is the envoy to the talks with Iran and really in charge of the entire overall Middle East policy, or others like Colin Kahl in the Pentagon, are all progressives, are all completely captivated by and committed to an agenda that's based on incredible hatred towards Israel. They just hate Israel, and they hate the U.S.-Israel alliance, and they are using their positions very clearly to advance an extremely anti-Israel and pro-Iranian agenda and policies across the board.
Progressives is a term that I always find sort of obscures the true sort of radical left, even Marxist attitude of a lot of these folks. And when you see it applied to not only our most important ally in the region, namely Israel, but also towards this pursuit of a hegemonic status for Iran. It seems so completely upside down, Carolyn, and I can only imagine how it looks from Israel, and more to the point, as the deal has been sort of trickling out, the nature of this agreement, the Joint Comprehensive Plan of Action 2.0, I guess you might call it. Um, it's all the more mind-boggling that this kind of um, reversal of traditional policies and common sense, for that matter, is being applied. Talk us through what we know about the deal as things stand now, and how it's seen from Israel.
Well, I mean, first, the deal itself does involve. I mean, it's a reapplication of the 2015 deal, but in an escalatory fashion, because for a number of reasons. One is because the nuclear safeguards that the 2015 deal placed on Iran's nuclear operations were very weak, and the ones that are in this deal are even weaker. And the 2015 deal was set to expire or begin expiring in after 5 years, and then gradually uh, over a 15-year period with a major period of expiration in 2025, a decade after the deal. Well, those deadlines haven't been moved. Iran, since Biden took office, massively expanded its nuclear enrichment of its uranium enrichment towards the development of a nuclear weapon. They've massively expanded their ballistic missile programs and other actions that advance their military nuclear capabilities. And the deal doesn't take away any of those new capabilities, and it doesn't change the deadline. So that whereas under the 2015 deal, Iran was effectively going to be a nuclear threshold state a decade later in 2025, now it's 2 years later. Now it's in 2.5 years in 2025. So we're looking at a much shorter timeline. We're looking at much weaker safeguards against Iran's nuclear operations from the ones that were already weak in 2015. And basically, what we're looking at is a deal that guarantees absolutely Iran will become a nuclear armed state within the very near future. And then the other aspect of it is the financial aspect of it, that this deal effectively abrogates not only the sanctions that were placed on Iran because of its nuclear operations, but also Trump's executive order against other Iranian entities because of their sponsorship of terrorism. And all of these sanctions that are being removed are going to empower or enrich Iran to the tune of between 90 billion and 130 billion dollars. And that kind of change in the hands of the most prolific state sponsor of terrorism guarantees regional war, because all of that money, as happened in 2016 after the initial sanctions were removed under the JCPOA, is going to be going into the hands and the wallets of Iran's terror armies, Hezbollah, the Houthis, the Shiite militias in Iraq, excuse me, excuse me, and the Hamas and others. And that's going to have a profound impact on their capabilities and on their operations.
Okay, so let's jump very quickly to two last points, Carolyn. One is Israel has been, in the past 2 weeks, feverishly trying, it seems, to um, reconstitute or at least strengthen some of the ties that had been put into place during the Trump years, the so-called Abraham Accords, notably, but also, strengthening relationships with the Egyptians. Um, this is in the face of this growing danger from Iran and the dangers associated with the United States as well, betraying Israel. Um, where does that leave Israel, and what do you think it has to do at this point?
Well, I mean, I think that the problem with what's happening with the Americans today is that Tony Blinken came to Israel this week with a very clear agenda, and the agenda was to emasculate and really empty of content the Abraham Accords. Abraham Accords were is effectively an expression of the strategic alliance that Israel and the Sunni Arab states had developed since 2014, when the Obama administration began courting Iran through nuclear appeasement. And Tony Blinken came in with this very anti-Sunni, anti-Israeli agenda, which he wanted to advance. And he did so by changing the subject and starting to talk about the Palestinians.
So he changed the topic to the Palestinian agenda, undermining the Israelis' efforts to uh, basically strengthen their ties to these Arab states and create, I guess, a kind of new fault line that would be exploitable by the Iranians. Uh, at some point, I guess very soon, if Israel remains intent on preventing the Iranians from getting the bomb, this is going to essentially come down to, are they going to be impeded by the United States, or do you think they're going to be able and feel the need to act on their own?
One of the most troubling things that we're seeing today in Israel is that the new government that we have, that's led by Naftali Bennett, excuse me, and Yair Lapid, and Defense Minister Benny Gantz, is in denial. Unlike the Sunnis, they're in denial about the American betrayal. They are still under the impression that the Biden administration is not implacably hostile towards Israel when it is, when it demonstrably is. And they are essentially giving up because they think that by appeasing the Biden administration.
Carolyn, we're going to have to come back to discuss more about what Israel and hopefully its friends in the United States need to do under these circumstances. This is a very, very troubling depiction of what's afoot.